The alley smelled of stale beer and something else, something metallic and thick that settled deep in the lungs. It was not the usual city stink, not just the diesel fumes or the garbage baking in the summer sun, but a deeper, older smell, like rust and spilled guts. Kane moved through it with the ease of smoke, a ripple of shadow across brick walls that sweat in the humid August night. The air was heavy clinging, a suffocating blanket even at 11:30 p.m., the kind of heat that made teeth ache and skin feel too tight. It was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were usually quiet, but tonight the city stood just a breath away from howling. He heard them, the other agents, breathing hard into their communicators, their voices tinny whispers in his ear. Visual on subject, Sector Gamma. Moving south, 10 yards from the dumpster. Negative contact, Beta. Perimeter secure, no civilian bleed through. They moved with the jerky, anxious energy of men wading into a deep, cold lake. Kane understood it. He had seen enough of them. Good men, decent men, fold under pressure, turn tail and run, or worse, freeze up and get torn apart. This was not their world, not really. They were just passing through, temporary custodians of a peace they barely understood. His world. It had been his world for so long. The other one, the one of daylight and easy laughter and uncomplicated hunger, was a story someone else had told him about. He was a creature of the night, yes, but not in the romantic sense. There was no romance in the drip of fresh blood, no poetry in the snap of bone. Just necessity. Just the brutal, undeniable truth of what he was and what his purpose had become. He rounded a corner, the alley opening into a wider street, and there it stood. Not a man anymore. The lone wolf, as the agency called him, stood hunched beside a knocked-over trash can, its snout wet, its eyes gleaming with feral intelligence and a raw, gnawing hunger. This one had slipped through the cracks, gone rogue, started carving a bloody path through the homeless population in the city's forgotten corners. An out-of-control subject, as the dry-voiced reports from Major Evelyn Reed's office had labeled it. Kane just saw a predator, sloppy and undisciplined. A loose thread that needed to be snipped. The werewolf was a brute, nearly 7 feet tall on its hind legs, matted fur the color of dried mud, muscles roiling under its skin. Its claws were long, yellowed things, dripping with fluid. The smell was stronger here, a thick, musky scent mixed with that coppery tang. Kane moved. He did not run, not in the human sense. It was more like an acceleration, a blurring of the air itself. One moment he stood. The next, he was a dark streak across the grimy pavement, silent as a fallen leaf. The werewolf, for all its animal cunning, was slow. It turned, a low growl rumbling in its chest, but it was already too late. Kane's hand flashed out, a silver blade appearing from nowhere, an extension of his will. He sliced through a thick tendon in the creature's leg, severing it with surgical precision. The werewolf howled, a sound of agony and rage, collapsing to one knee. Before it could even begin to recover, Kane was on its back, a blur of motion, his weight negligible, yet anchoring. He drove the blade again, this time into the base of the skull, a precise, devastating strike. There was a sickening crunch, a final shudder, and the werewolf went limp, dissolving back into the grotesque, half-human form of a man it had once been. Silence fell, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant wail of a police siren quickly fading. It was always like this. The agency vanguard cleaned up the mess long before the flashing lights arrived. Subject neutralized, Kane's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a mere formality into his communicators. Retrieval team en route. He stepped away from the corpse, leaving it sprawled in the alley, a miserable, broken thing. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, certainly no fear. Just the quiet hum of a job done, efficiently, perfectly. That was his gift, his curse. He saw them, these other creatures of the night, the shifters, the blood drinkers, the things that lurk in the shadows, and he saw them as animals, wild, untamed, deserving of nothing but eradication or at best, strict control. He was the apex, the ultimate predator, honed by centuries of existence. He carried the burden of his past, the ancient curse, the losses that had stripped him of anything resembling human weakness, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding core of efficiency. Back at the agency's clandestine outpost, buried deep beneath an unassuming office building in a suburb that could have been anywhere, Kane sat in the cool, sterile glow of a data terminal. The air here was recycled, smelling faintly of ozone and stale coffee. He worked through the reports, sifting through the usual stream of nuisance attacks, petty squabbles between rival packs, and the occasional rogue vampire that needed reining in. It was mundane, tiresome, a necessary evil, but he craved something more, a challenge. Then he saw it. Scattered, almost mythological mentions, buried deep in older, less credible files. Fragments from ancient informants, snippets of intercepted communications, whispers that had drifted down from the frozen north. A forbidden zone, somewhere in the Alaskan mountains. A place so remote, so untouched, that even the wild ones, the most savage of the werewolves, dared not tread. This was not just information. This was a crack in the foundation of everything he thought he knew. Werewolves feared humans in some instances. They feared Silver in some instances. They always feared him, but to fear a place? It did not compute. It was an anomaly, an irritation. And for Kane, anything that defied his understanding, anything that possessed a power or a terror that transcended his own, was a weakness, a vulnerability he could exploit, a tool to be wielded. He brought the file to Major Evelyn Reed's office. Her space was as spare and functional as her demeanor, stripped clean of any personal touches. Her short iron-gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing behind wire-rimmed glasses. She was a woman who did not waste words or emotions. "Kane," she said, her voice gravelly. "What is it?" He laid the datapad on her desk, the screen glowing with the faded satellite images and cryptic reports. "This, the Alaskan anomaly. There are recurring mentions, Major. Old ones. Too consistent to be mere superstition." She leaned forward, her gaze tracking the data. The Forbidden Zone. We have seen these before. Local legends, usually. Exaggerated threats to protect hunting grounds. Not like this, Kane countered, his voice steady. The sheer terror evident in these reports, even from the most savage packs. The avoidance patterns are absolute. No incursions ever. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Imagine the implications, Major. If there is something out there, something even they fear, it could be the ultimate solution to the werewolf problem. A weapon. A deterrent that transcends silver and bullets. Major Evelyn Reed picked up the pad, turning it over in her hands. Her brow furrowed. A rare sign of contemplation. "A final solution," she murmured almost to herself. She looked up, her gaze meeting his, and for a fleeting moment, Kane saw a flicker of something in her eyes that resembled hope and the weary pragmatism of a woman who had spent too many years fighting an endless war. Investigate it. Use what resources you need. but discreetly. No unnecessary attention. Kane gave a curt nod. Understood. He turned to leave, the thought already taking root in his mind, growing like a dark, invasive weed. He did not just see a weapon for the agency. He saw a key. A final, decisive victory over a species he considered primitive, brutish. A way to assert his absolute dominance, not just over individual wolves, but over the very concept of their existence. This was not just a mission anymore. It was personal. It was the ultimate test of his superiority. And in that quiet, sterile office, the seed of his pride, his fatal flaw, took root and began to blossom. It was a cold, hard thing, utterly devoid of warmth, and utterly blind to the true depth of the horror that waited. The scent was faint, almost imperceptible to a human nose, clinging to the spruce needles in the damp earth. It was a mix of pine resin, damp soil, and something uniquely wolfen, not the rank musk of a dominant male, nor the sweet sick tang of a fresh kill, but something else. Something tinged with desperation and an underlying fear. It was the scent of an outcast, a lone wolf moving through the harsh landscape of northern Canada, far from its familiar hunting grounds. Kane had followed it for 3 days, a relentless shadow moving silently across vast, unforgiving miles. The agency's intelligence was sparse. A single garbled transmission picked up from a reclusive shifter cell far to the south. An anomaly. An individual, designated Kai, exiled not for violence or insubordination, but for breaking an ancient taboo. A taboo related, they knew, to the Forbidden Zone in Alaska. Kane did not deal in suspicion. He dealt in facts, and the fact was, this creature was a key. He moved through the boreal forest, the low-lying sun casting long blue shadows through the thick canopy of fir and birch. The ground was uneven, a tangled mesh of exposed roots and fallen logs, but Kane's boots made no sound. He was an extension of the wilderness, a silent, deadly predator tracking another. He noted the broken twigs, the scuff marks on frost-heaved earth, the faint, lingering warmth on a rock where the outcast had rested. Kai was clever, an experienced survivor. He doubled back, used streams to mask his scent, climbed hills that even a seasoned tracker might avoid. But Kane was more than seasoned. He was an ancient instinct given form. The temperature had dropped steadily throughout the day, sinking to a bone-chilling 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and made muscles clench. The air was crisp, clean, biting. It was not the bitter, tearing cold of Alaska, but it was enough to remind Kane of the coming challenge. He found Kai's temporary lair in an abandoned mining camp, a cluster of dilapidated shacks and rusted-out machinery huddled in a deep valley. The place was a ghost town, swallowed by the encroaching forest. The wind whispered through broken windows, rattling loose sheets of corrugated tin, a mournful, lonely sound. The air here was heavy with the smell of decay, of damp wood and rusted iron, a faint, lingering scent of human endeavor gone to ruin. It was perfect, isolated, forgotten. Kai was in his human form, huddled beside a cold fire pit, wrapped in a tattered blanket, his face drawn and gaunt. He looked like any other transient, a man lost to the fringes of society, except for the wildness in his eyes, the quick, darting glances, the way his body coiled even in repose. Kane watched him from the shadows for a long time, observing, calculating. Kai gnawed on a piece of dried meat, his movements precise, economical. This was a creature used to living off the land, surviving on instinct and a razor-sharp wit. Cain chose his moment, a gust of wind rustling the leaves, and stepped from the gloom. Kai's head snapped up, his eyes widening in primal fear. He did not scream. He did not even make a sound. Just a low, guttural growl that vibrated in the air. "Kai," Cain said, his voice quiet, almost conversational, but laced with an undeniable authority. "We need to talk." The werewolf did not answer in words. In a flash, he was transforming, his muscles bulging, bones cracking with sickening pops, his skin stretching as coarse fur erupted. In seconds, he was a hulking, four-legged beast, larger than the rogue Cain had dispatched just days before. A deep, rumbling snarl emanating from his throat. He lunged, a desperate, terrifying blur of teeth and claws. Cain met him head-on. The fight was short, brutal, a blur of motion in the failing light. Kai fought with the desperate ferocity of an animal backed into a corner, every movement aimed at tearing, ripping, destroying. But Cain was faster, stronger, more precise. He dodged a snapping maw, sidestepped a sweeping claw, his own movements fluid, inhumanly graceful. He did not waste energy. Every strike, every parry, every calculated move was designed to disable, to disarm, to break the creature down. He slammed a fist into Kai's snout, feeling the cartilage shatter. The werewolf staggered back, howling in pain, blood gushing. Cain pressed his advantage, a relentless blur, striking nerve clusters, tearing tendons. Kai dropped to one knee, whimpering, his body contorting, trying to shift back, trying to escape the agony. "Stop!" Cain commanded, his voice a low growl, as he twisted Kai's arm into an unnatural angle, eliciting a choked cry of pain. Or, "I will end you now." Kai's transformation faltered, his body caught between man and beast, a grotesque sculpture of pain and fear. His eyes, still wolfen, but now swimming with desperate human intelligence, locked onto Cain's. "No, please. I know things. The zone. I can take you there." The words tumbled out, hoarse and ragged, thick with fear, and the lingering pain of transformation. Cain paused, his grip unyielding. "Tell me," he demanded, his voice flat. "The Forbidden Land." Kai gasped, blood flecking his teeth. "In the Alaska mountains. My pack, they cast me out. I stumbled into it by accident. Just a foot. A single foot across the boundary. It was awful. Ancient. So old, so evil." His voice trailed off into a choked sob, his body trembling uncontrollably. Cain watched him, analyzing the terror. It was not simple fear of the unknown. It was something deeper, something primal, something etched into the very core of Kai's being. An irrational, fundamental horror that transcended even the werewolf's natural instinct for self-preservation. This was not just a taboo. It was a scar, a deeply ingrained wound in the collective psyche of the species. It confirmed Cain's hypothesis. Something inspired such abject, irrational terror in creatures as powerful and savage as werewolves. It was not just a weakness. It was a tool, the ultimate instrument of their destruction, a solution. "Your life," Cain said, his voice cutting through Kai's gasps, "for the path. And all you know about it, every detail." Kai stared at him, his human eyes wide and raw with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. The thought of returning to that place, even with Cain as his unlikely escort, was clearly agonizing. But the alternative was immediate, painful death. There was no real choice. "Yes," Kai whispered, his voice barely audible. "Yes, I'll take you." A shaky alliance was forged in the cold, desolate mining camp. It was built on fear, mutual self-interest, and a chasm of distrust. Kai feared Kane, a creature of cold, calculated power, but he feared the unknown in the mountains even more. Kane saw Kai as a mere instrument, a compass, a map, nothing more. But even a tool could be dangerous if wielded improperly. Kane would keep his gaze fixed forward, on the prize. He would not look back. Days later, Kane stood on the tarmac of a remote airfield, the roar of the helicopter's twin engines thrumming in his chest. He had pulled strings, leveraged favors, and he twisted a few arms within the agency. Major Evelyn Reed had provided the necessary resources, specialized cold weather gear, an insulated chopper for deep insertion, long-range communications equipment. But Kane had kept the true nature of his mission cloaked in shadows. He had not revealed Kai's role, nor the sheer, horrifying potential of what he sought. This was his discovery, his ultimate weapon. He would not risk interference, not now. Kai, shivering despite the thick layers of Arctic clothing Kane had procured for him, looked like a man condemned. His face was pale, his eyes darting, constantly scanning the vast, empty expanse of snow-covered tarmac and the dark, looming mountains beyond. He was in his human form, frail and vulnerable against the backdrop of this colossal, unforgiving land. The air was razor-sharp, cutting through even the thickest fabric, a brutal 0 degrees Fahrenheit with the wind chill. "Get in," Kane ordered, his voice flat, devoid of sympathy. He felt nothing for the creature beside him, no more than he would for a map. The objective was clear. The helicopter lifted off, a dark speck against the immense, indifferent sky. Below them, the landscape stretched out, a vast, unbroken wilderness of white and jagged rock, miles upon miles of frozen silence. They flew for hours, the thrum of the rotors a hypnotic drone, the world outside becoming an alien, hostile panorama. This was not the domesticated cold of the lower 48, where snow meant cozy fires and hot chocolate. This was raw, primordial cold, the kind that ate at them, gnawed at their resolve, threatened to freeze the very blood in their veins. Kane watched Kai. The werewolf's human form was ill-suited to this environment. He huddled deeper into his seat, his breath fogging the small window, his eyes wide with a fear that grew with every mile they put behind them. He pointed occasionally, a trembling finger indicating a ridgeline, a hidden valley. But mostly he just stared out, a silent, trembling mess. "Where is it?" Kane demanded at one point, his voice cutting through the roar of the engines. Kai swallowed hard, his throat dry. Deeper. Always deeper. The mountains. They do not want us there. His fear was palpable, a sickly, cloying thing that began to leach into the sterile air of the helicopter. Kane felt it, not as fear himself, but as a subtle tightening in his chest, an almost imperceptible hum of tension. Even for him, a creature that had seen horrors beyond human comprehension, there was something unnerving about Kai's abject terror. It was not just physical, it was spiritual. They landed on a flat, wind-swept plateau, the helicopter kicking up a swirling vortex of fine snow. The pilot, a grizzled agency veteran with ice in his beard, gave Kane a look that mingled respect with something colder, almost fear. "Radio silence from here on, Kane. Too many unknowns this deep in. Good luck." He did not wait for a reply, just gave a curt nod and ascended back into the unforgiving sky, leaving them utterly alone. The silence that descended after the helicopter faded was absolute, crushing. The wind, a constant whining companion, whipped across the plateau, carrying with it the scent of pure ice and something else. Something metallic and ancient, like deep-buried ore. It was 45 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, with the wind chill making it feel like 80 below. They began their trek, Kai leading the way, stumbling through the deep snow, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Kane followed, unconcerned by the cold, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the landscape. He started to notice things, small things at first. Unusual tracks in the fresh snowfall, not belonging to any known animal. Too large for a wolf, too many toes for a bear. They were human-like in their configuration, but impossibly wide, impossibly deep. Faint, fleeting shadows glimpsed just at the edge of his vision, cresting distant ridges, only to vanish when he focused. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, like ink dropped into water. Then came the sounds. Low, guttural growls carried on the wind from impossible distances. Kai whined when he heard them, a low, almost canine sound from deep in his throat. "What is that?" Kane asked, his voice sharp. Kai shivered violently. The ancient guardians. They sing. They warn. They are watching. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, his face etched with a desperate, hopeless terror. The cold and the crushing isolation began to work on their minds. Kai was openly panicking now, his movements jerky, his eyes constantly darting, seeing things that were there, things Kane could not yet perceive. His terror was a contagious thing, a low-grade fever that started to work its way under Kane's own skin. It was unsettling. He did not feel fear, not exactly. He felt a deep, primal tension that began to hum beneath his practiced calm. The hairs on his neck prickled. They found the first trap at the mouth of a narrow gorge, hidden beneath a snowdrift. It was a crude but effective snare, made of sinew and sharpened bone, designed not to kill, but to maim, to slow, to send a clear message. Kai almost stepped into it, crying out as Kane pulled him back with a sudden, forceful yank. "They are playing with us," Kane murmured, his gaze sweeping the jagged rocks above, like mice. Kai was shaking, his teeth chattering. "They do not want us here. They never wanted anyone here. This land, it keeps the secrets." The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange. The wind picked up, howling now, a deep, mournful lament that echoed through the valleys. And then, carried on that wind, from somewhere deep in the heart of the mountains, came a sound. Not a growl, not a whine, but a long, drawn-out howl, ancient and mournful, filled with a terrible resonant power. It reverberated through the very bedrock, a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the spine. It was not a warning anymore. It was a declaration. A summons. "They know," Kai whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. "They know we are here." Kane felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. The hunt had begun. But for the first time in centuries, he was not entirely sure who was the hunter and who was the prey. The blizzard hit with a sudden savage fury, a whiteout that descended like a shroud. The wind shrieked, a banshee wail through the jagged peaks, whipping snow into a blinding vortex. It was the perfect cover, and Kane knew it. They had been waiting. The attack came not from the front, but from everywhere at once. Shadows detached themselves from the swirling snow, impossibly fast, impossibly silent. These were no ordinary werewolves. These were the guardians of shadow, ancient, disciplined warriors, their forms larger, more sinewy than any Kane had encountered before. They moved with the precision of a trained unit, their bodies melding seamlessly with the treacherous mountain terrain. They used the blizzard, the biting cold, the very chaos of the elements as their allies. One launched itself from a snow-covered rock face, a dark, snarling missile. Cain met it with a blur of motion, his silver blade a streak of light in the gloom. The fight was brutal, a maelstrom of teeth, claws, and flashing steel. Cain was a whirlwind, an unstoppable force, his vampiric speed and strength turning the werewolves' numerical advantage into a horrifying slaughter. He moved too fast to be seen, a phantom in the snow, striking with surgical precision. Limbs tore, bones snapped, and the coppery smell of hot blood bloomed on the frigid air, quickly freezing into dark stains on the pristine white. Kai, caught between his innate fear and the desperate need to survive, fought alongside Cain. He was a creature of pure instinctual rage, a desperate whirlwind of fur and teeth, tearing at the flanks of the Guardians, snarling defiance. His eyes, though, were wide with terror, not just of the Guardians, but of Cain's chilling efficiency. He saw the detached, almost mechanical way Cain dispatched their attackers, the lack of hesitation, the absolute absence of mercy. It was terrifyingly effective. The snow churned red. Cain moved from one foe to the next, a phantom of death, his movements fluid, deadly. He disemboweled one, ripped the throat from another, dismembered a third with casual ease. The Guardians were elite, but they were still flesh and blood, and Cain was something else entirely. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the remaining Guardians melted back into the blizzard, leaving behind a gruesome tableau of dismembered bodies, their lifeblood steaming in the sub-zero air. Cain stood over the fallen, his chest barely rising, no sweat, no labored breath. Just the faint sheen of blood on his cheek, quickly freezing. He knelt, his movements precise, examining the corpses. He found them. Strange, ancient amulets carved from blackened bone strung around their necks. Intricate symbols were etched onto their massive canines and razor-sharp claws. These were not just wild animals. This was a lineage, a purpose, a deep and unyielding connection to traditions as old as the mountains themselves. They were more than protectors, they were devoted. The first attack had failed to stop them. Now, the Guardians changed their tactics. The harassment became constant, insidious. They became more like phantoms, attacking in brief, brutal skirmishes in the dead of night, slipping in and out of the blizzards that brewed ceaselessly. They did not aim to kill outright, not anymore. They aimed to exhaust, to mentally fray, to break down resolve. It was a war of attrition. Cain, despite his inhuman resilience, felt the toll. The constant vigilance, the relentless cold, the gnawing certainty that they were being watched, stalked, hunted. He felt a subtle fatigue begin to creep into his muscles, a dull ache behind his eyes that no amount of rest alleviated. It was unnerving. He had not felt true exhaustion in centuries. Kai was worse. He was a wreck. His human form was racked by tremors, his eyes haunted, his voice reduced to a thin, reedy whisper. He jumped at every shadow, every shift in the wind. He transformed frequently without conscious thought as the animal within him tried to find comfort in its primal state. The tension between them was a tangible thing, a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Cain saw Kai's fear as a weakness, an irritation. Kai saw Cain's relentless drive as a terrifying alien madness. Each knew the other was the weakest link, the one who would crack first. One particularly brutal night, deep inside a narrow ice canyon where the wind howled like a tortured soul. They were ambushed again. This time, the Guardians came in a tighter formation, their movements coordinated, their eyes glowing with an almost fanatical zeal. Cain fought with a ferocity born of rising irritation, carving a path through their ranks. Kai, snarling, ripped and tore, his own fear driving him to near madness. But as the last Guardian fell, Cain felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the outside world. The remaining Guardians did not fight to the death this time. They retreated, melting back into the swirling snow, their forms fading like phantoms. It was not a rout. It was a withdrawal, a calculated move. An invisible hand touched Cain's spine, sending a shiver through him. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen presence. This was not the end. It was merely the prologue. A being, far more powerful, far more ancient, had finally decided to involve itself. The true hunt had begun. The snow had momentarily ceased, leaving the world a pristine, blinding white. The sky was an impossible bruised purple, heavy with the promise of more blizzards. And then he appeared. He did not just walk out of the swirling snow. He formed from it, coalescing out of the furious white, impossibly large, impossibly ancient. The Elder. His fur was the color of old ice, his eyes like chips of obsidian, ancient and weary, yet burning with an immense, palpable power. He stood easily 10 feet tall at the shoulder, a massive primordial beast, radiating an aura of wisdom and profound sorrow. This was no mere wolf. This was a king, a living legend. And his appearance was not an attack, but a desperate, final attempt to make them understand. "Go back," the Elder's voice rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the very bedrock, a guttural language Cain understood in his bones. It was not a snarl of rage, but a deep, mournful plea. "You do not understand what you seek. You will awaken only ruin." Cain ignored him. His blood thrummed with anticipation. This was it, the true obstacle. The one who held the final secret. The battle that ensued was epic, brutal, and utterly alien. The Elder was not merely a physical force. He was a master of his environment, a conduit for the mountain's wrath. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, each pawfall shaking the ground. He did not just attack with teeth and claws. He summoned the very elements. With a guttural roar, the ground shuddered, and a cascade of ice and snow thundered down a nearby slope. A deliberate avalanche aimed squarely at Cain. Cain leapt, a dark blur against the white, just barely escaping the crushing weight. Then came the psychic attacks. Waves of raw, ancient power, slamming into Cain's mind like invisible hammers. Visions flashed before his eyes. Ancient forests, the scent of burning blood, the screams of primordial beasts, all tinged with an indescribable horror. It was an assault on his very sanity, a desperate attempt to overwhelm his will, to break his resolve, to make him turn back. Even Cain, with his formidable mental defenses, felt the strain. A cold sweat beaded on his brow. His head throbbed. He was pushed to the very edge of his limits. Kai, caught in the psychic backwash, crumpled to the ground, whimpering, clutching his head, his human form convulsing. He was clearly in agony, unable to bear the sheer force of the Elder's power. "You will destroy us all!" the Elder roared, his voice laced with not fury, but a profound, bitter regret. He moved not to kill, but to contain, to repel, his every action infused with a heartbreaking desperation to prevent what he knew was coming. His attacks were designed to deter, to incapacitate, to push them away from the ancient secret he had guarded for so long. Cain fought back with a cold, focused fury, his centuries of combat experience honed to a razor's edge. He dodged another psychic assault, feeling the air crackle around him. He saw the opening. The Elder, for all his power, poured too much energy into the psychic assault, his physical guard fractionally lowered. With inhuman speed, Cain closed the distance, a silver dagger appearing in his hand. He feinted left, drawing the Elder's massive head, then plunged the blade deep into the creature's flank, aiming for the kidney. The Elder roared, a sound of agony and shock, staggering back. The psychic assault faltered, then dissolved. Blood, dark and thick, streamed onto the pristine snow. Cain pressed his advantage, relentless. He circled the wounded Elder, striking again and again, targeting weak points, tendons, joints. The Elder fought back with primal ferocity, but he was hobbled, weakened. Finally, with a brutal, precise blow to the back of the neck, Cain brought the ancient wolf down. The Elder collapsed, a groaning, massive heap of fur and muscle, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His eyes, still filled with that ancient wisdom, now reflected only pain and a profound, bone-deep weariness. Cain stood over him, breathing evenly, his own body aching in a way it had not in centuries. It was not a victory in the conventional sense. He had not broken the Elder's spirit, had not crushed his will. He had merely incapacitated him. A temporary triumph, nothing more. "Speak," Cain commanded, his voice cold and sharp. "Tell me what you guard. What is the nature of this evil you fear so deeply?" He knelt, pressing the silver blade to the Elder's throat, a silent promise of more pain. He believed with an unshakable certainty that the Elder held the key, the final piece of the puzzle. The Elder whimpered, a sound of profound pain and a sorrow so deep it was almost unbearable. His eyes, fixed on Cain's, were not filled with hatred but with a terrible ancient horror, a terror that went beyond the immediate threat of the silver blade. It was a terror of what Cain represented, of what he was about to unleash. And in those terrified ancient eyes, Cain saw it. Not a warning, but a confirmation. This was not just a powerful creature guarding a secret. This was a guardian of true, unimaginable power, a power that, in his own twisted mind, would soon be his. His pride, an almost tangible thing, swelled in his chest. He was on the right path, the path to ultimate, unchallengeable might. The air in the ice cave was still, dead, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and cold, like old blood. The Elder lay prone on the frozen ground, his massive body racked with tremors, his breathing shallow. Cain knelt beside him, his silver blade still pressed to the ancient wolf's throat. Kai huddled a few yards away, shivering, his eyes wide with a terror that deepened with every passing moment. "Tell me," Cain repeated, his voice a low, insistent demand. "Tell me what you guard. What is the great evil? What must sleep?" The Elder whimpered a low guttural sound, his obsidian eyes fixed on Cain. You must not awaken it. It is a sin. A great sin, older than memory, older than us." His voice was weak, ragged, but infused with a raw, undeniable fear that sent a chill down Cain's spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperatures. We swore an oath, a blood oath, to keep it sealed, to keep the world safe from its hunger. As the Elder spoke the word oath, his body suddenly contorted. A choked gasp escaped his throat. his muscles seized, his great frame arching in an agony that transcended physical pain. Blood, dark and thick, began to seep from the corners of his eyes, tracing crimson rivulets down his icy fur. A horrifying gurgling sound erupted from his throat as an invisible hand closed around it, squeezing the life out of him. Kai screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure horror. The oath! The blood oath! He scrambled backwards, pressing himself against the ice wall, his face ashen, his body shaking uncontrollably. He watched the elder's agony with a terrible, dawning comprehension. This was not just a threat. This was a cosmic punishment, a primal curse. Something so fundamental, so ancient, that his entire species sacrificed its very freedom, its voice, its shared history, to contain it. The depth of the secret was staggering, terrifying. Cain, however, saw it differently. He watched the elder's horrifying convulsions, the blood, the choking, and a flicker of something like triumph ignited in his cold, dead eyes. This was not a warning. This was proof. Proof of the incredible, unfathomable power contained within this mountain. The elder's agony was merely the cost of such a profound secret. His contempt for the elder's weakness, for its fear and its suffering, only intensified his resolve. He alone, Cain reasoned, was strong enough to face this. He alone could harness it. "Tell me," Cain snarled, pressing the blade deeper, uncaring of the elder's suffering. "Tell me the origin of this oath, who forged it? Who is this hunger?" Through broken gasps, through the sickening sound of his own blood bubbling in his throat, the elder tried to convey the truth. His words became disjointed, a jumble of ancient languages and primal sounds. He clawed at the ice with trembling paws, etching crude, powerful symbols into the frozen ground. Symbols of a world long dead, of battles fought before human memory, of alliances forged in the face of an encroaching darkness. Our ancestors, the elder gasped, blood spraying from his lips. They found it, trapped it. But it was too powerful, too old. They made a pact with something else, not of this world, to seal it, to preserve the balance. He coughed, a terrible, wet sound, his body convulsing even more violently. A sacrifice. Generations sworn to silence to keep it asleep. For all eternity, his words began to lose all meaning, devolving into guttural moans, pleas, and terrifying inchoate warnings. He saw Cain not as an interrogator, but as a monstrous catalyst, the harbinger of an ancient horror he had dedicated his entire long life to keeping dormant. His eyes, unfocused, stared past Cain into some unseen abyss filled with a primal, desperate dread for what was about to happen. "He is dying," Kai whispered, his voice trembling, tears streaming freely down his face. "The oath, it is killing him. He cannot tell you." Cain ignored Kai. He stared at the elder's thrashing form, at the blood, at the crude symbols etched in the ice. He had enough. He had enough to know. The ancient pact, the unutterable name of the horror, the incredible power, it all coalesced into a single blinding certainty in his mind. This was not a warning. It was an affirmation. His pride, his insatiable hunger for control, for the ultimate weapon, had utterly blinded him. He could not see the true nature of the impending catastrophe, could not grasp the raw, terrifying power of what he was about to unleash. He only saw his own reflection, distorted and monstrous, standing victorious over the vanquished foe. He stood, sheathing his blade. The elder's death throes continued, a gruesome soundtrack to Cain's triumph. The stage was set. The elder's final gurgling gasp faded into the oppressive silence of the ice cave. Cain, heedless of the chilling spectacle of the dying wolf, turned, his expression unreadable. Kai, still trembling, slowly pulled himself away from the wall, his eyes fixed on Cain, a mixture of profound fear and dawning helpless horror. "We move," Cain commanded, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. He prodded the elder's inert form with his boot, then glanced at Kai. "Lead the way, to the heart." The journey deeper into the mountain became an odyssey of increasing dread. The terrain itself turned hostile, as if the very bedrock was alive and fighting their intrusion. The snow-covered passes grew narrower, the ice-choked chasms deeper, stretching into abyssal darkness. Anomalous weather phenomena became commonplace. Sudden, localized blizzards that erupted and died within minutes, ice storms that coated everything in a treacherous, glittering glaze, and strange, swirling fogs that hummed with an unseen energy. The mountain was alive, twisting itself into impossible shapes, attempting to crush or swallow them whole. The mountains around them began to take on a terrifying, unnatural cast. The icy peaks were no longer just geological formations. They resembled monstrous, hunched shoulders, or the jagged, broken teeth of a colossal, buried beast. They passed through ice caves that looked eerily like gaping maws, their interiors slick with strange, weeping moisture. Sharp, spiny rock formations jutted out from the snow, like petrified claws reaching for the frigid sky. And in the deeper valleys, they saw anomalous ice formations, colossal spires and grotesque sculptures that pulsed with a faint, sickly light, emanating a cold that burned the lungs. Kai was a walking wreck, constantly shivering, even in his thick thermal gear. He moved with a leaden gait, his eyes wide and unfocused. The mental impact of their proximity to the ancient evil was almost unbearable for him. His werewolf instincts, usually a source of strength, were now a torment, screaming warnings, a constant, high-pitched alarm bell in his mind. He heard whispers, indistinct at first, then growing clearer, forming a chorus of ancient voices in his mind, pleading with him to turn back, to abandon this fool's errand. It was a siren song of pure, unadulterated terror. Cain felt it too, a subtle shift in the air, a tangible weight on his senses. It was not the searing psychic assault of the elder, but something far more insidious, more pervasive. A feeling of wrongness, of a profound, ancient power stirring from a deep slumber. It was a physical cold that seeped into his bones, even his unfeeling vampire physiology, a chill that went beyond mere temperature. It was the chill of ages, of something vast and terrible. He did not feel fear, not yet. He felt a strange, thrilling anticipation, mixed with a growing sense of immense, almost unbearable pressure. This was no mere beast. This was something truly grand. They encountered inexplicable phenomena. Fleeting ice mirages shimmered on the horizon, showing impossible landscapes, distorted figures only to vanish as they approached. Phantom sounds, like the echoes of ancient battles, clanging steel and the guttural roars of things long dead, drifted on the wind. Brief but vivid, visions assailed them. Glimpses of horrific, shapeless forms moving in the periphery, creatures of pure shadow and malice. These were not mere hallucinations. These were the first tendrils of a waking primordial force reaching out across time and space. Kai stumbled, then fell, clutching his head, groaning. The whispers, they are getting louder. They want me to go back. They want me to die. Cain simply looked down at him, his face impassive. Get up. He prodded Kai with his boot, a silent command. Kai pushed himself to his feet, trembling but obeying. The horror was now too deeply ingrained for him to defy Kane. Finally, after what felt like an endless march through a nightmare landscape, they found it. The entrance to the ice cave. It was hidden behind a perpetual curtain of swirling blizzard, invisible to the naked eye. But Kai sensed it, his head snapping up, a low whimper escaping his lips. It was not a natural opening. It was a massive, gaping maw, rent in the side of the mountain, framed by impossibly sharp fangs of ice. An anomalous cold radiated from its depths, so intense it burned their exposed skin, stinging their eyes, making their lungs ache with every ragged breath. Ancient, half-erased symbols, weathered by millennia of wind and ice, covered the entrance, swirling patterns that pulsed faintly in the deepening gloom. They spoke of a history utterly beyond human comprehension. It was not a cave. It was a tomb. A monstrous, gaping tomb. All three of them stepped inside. The air instantly became heavy, pressing down on them, thick with a smell that was undeniably ancient. The stench of cold, preserved death, of dust that had never known the light, and of time itself, congealed and frozen. As their feet crossed the invisible threshold, there was a faint, almost imperceptible click, and the air behind them solidified. The blizzard outside vanished. The world they had known, the world of wind and snow and biting cold, was gone. They were sealed in, utterly, irrevocably, horrifyingly sealed within the very heart of the mountain. The silence that descended was absolute, a crushing weight that promised no escape. The silence inside the cave was absolute, broken only by the crunch of their boots on the icy floor and the ragged gasps of Kai. The air was heavy, oppressive, thick with the scent of frozen dust and something else. Something metallic and ancient, like deep-buried blood that had never fully dried. The abnormal cold that radiated from the entrance had intensified, stinging Kane's eyes, burning in Kai's lungs. They moved deeper, the tunnel twisting and turning like the gullet of a colossal petrified beast, its walls slick with weeping crystalline moisture. Then the tunnel opened into a vast cavernous hall. The sight that greeted them stole Kai's breath, and for a fleeting, imperceptible moment, even Kane felt a chilling jolt that went beyond mere surprise. In the center of the colossal chamber, buried within a monumental block of pure, translucent ice, lay a creature of unimaginable scale. It was a werewolf, yes, but not like any Kai had ever known, or any Kane had ever hunted. This was something from the primordial depths of nightmare. It was colossal, dozens of yards long, its bulk filling a significant portion of the chamber. Its form was distorted, grotesque, its shape twisted and stretched by the sheer weight of its power and the passage of untold eons. Its limbs were too long, its head too massive, its teeth like sharpened stone, not bone. Its features, even through the clear ice, were more demonic than animal, a terrifying fusion of primal wolf and something unspeakably evil. Its eyes, frozen wide and staring, glowed with an ancient, contained fury that radiated even through the thick, crystal-clear prison. The elder, who had been dragged along, a broken, whimpering husk, suddenly let out a profound, guttural wail. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated horror, mixed with a deep, reverent worship. He fell to his knees on the ice, his crippled body trembling, struggling to raise a withered paw towards the colossal form encased in ice. Tears, freezing almost instantly on his ancient fur, streamed down his face. His silent scream was agonizing. Cain felt a surge of exhilaration, a dark, triumphant thrumming in his ancient blood. This was it, the ultimate prize, the weapon he had so single-mindedly pursued. It surpassed all his expectations. He saw no horror in its distorted features, no warning in the elder's abject terror. He saw only power, unfathomable, colossal, overwhelming power. His pride, an almost tangible entity, swelled to its apex, blinding him to the truth. This was not a weapon. This was a god, a forgotten, vengeful god. Even in its frozen, imprisoned state, the colossal being radiated a powerful mental impulse. It was a silent scream, a wave of ancient thought that slammed into the chamber. For Cain, it was a vibration, a chilling hum of raw energy. For Kai, it was a terrifying, invasive assault. Kai cried out, clutching his head. His body began to convulse, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His eyes, already wide with fear, suddenly glazed over, then began to glow with a strange internal light, a deep, ancient fire. The mental impulse was overwhelming, tearing at the fabric of his sanity. Then came the visions. Brief, violent flashes of images seared themselves into Kai's mind. He saw ancient times, epochs long before human civilizations. He saw colossal, brutal battles, mountains of fur and blood. He saw betrayal, a cunning, brutal act by his own ancestors, led by figures that resembled the Elder, figures who moved with a grim, determined purpose. He saw the sealing, the agonizing struggle to contain the colossal entity, to drive it into this icy tomb, to bind it with symbols and blood. He saw the pact, the terrible sacrifices, the generations-long vigilance. All of it, a flood of repressed ancestral memory, pouring into his consciousness. Kai screamed again, a raw animal sound, as his very identity dissolved. The visions, the overwhelming mental impulse, the sheer ancient power of the trapped entity, were tearing him apart, replacing his individual consciousness with something older, more fundamental. His pupils constricted, became slitted, feral. His muscles, even in his human form, began to bulge and tense, a grotesque caricature of strength. A low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his throat, not his own, but an echo of the colossal beast before him. His body visibly transformed, flesh rippling, bones groaning, a horrifying, accelerated shift into something far more monstrous than Cain witnessed. He became a conduit, a puppet, his own will utterly subsumed by the ancient, hungry force within the ice. The mental impulse emanating from the encased behemoth became an unbearable torrent, a deafening roar within Kai's skull. The internal struggle, brief and ultimately futile, ended in complete and utter subjugation. Kai's blood, ignited by an unseen spark, literally boiled beneath his skin. His muscles, already tense, distended to impossible proportions, tearing through the agency-issued thermals like wet paper. In a horrifying, instantaneous explosion of flesh and fur, he transformed. Not into the relatively graceful werewolf form Cain had seen before, but into something far more massive, more primal, a hulking, hunched figure of raw, untamed power, its features twisted into a mask of bestial fury. Blinded by the ancient will of the ancient being, Kai moved with a terrifying speed and ferocity that caught Cain completely off guard. He was no longer the frightened, cowering outcast. He was an extension of the monstrous will contained in the ice. Kai lunged, a sudden powerful blur of fangs and claws. Cain barely reacted, raising an arm to block, but it was too late. Kai seized him, his grip like a vice. and with a guttural roar, slammed the vampire against the sheer icy wall of the cavern. Cain gasped, the impact rattling his ancient bones. Before he could recover, before he could even register the shock of betrayal, Kai began to smash him down a series of jagged ice ledges, using each projection to amplify the force of the fall. The sounds were sickening. The wet thud of Cain's body against solid ice, the sickening crack of bone, a choked cry from the vampire that was more surprise than pain. Cain landed in a crumpled heap at the bottom, his limbs splayed at unnatural angles, blood blooming like dark roses on the pristine ice. Even as Cain struggled to push himself up, his body screaming in shocking agony, Kai, driven by the ancient being's ancient, irresistible command, turned his wrath upon the elder. There was no hesitation, no pity. This was not merely an act of violence, but a brutal, ritualistic sacrifice, precisely orchestrated to unleash the slumbering terror. Kai tore into the elder, ripping his ancient form apart with a primal, ravenous hunger. The elder's ancient, magicked blood, imbued with the power of millennia of guardianship, gushed forth in torrents, painting the pure ice around the ancient being's prison in a shocking, vibrant crimson. As the blood pooled, it began to react violently with the ancient, intricately carved symbols that covered the colossal ice block. A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, growing in intensity. The ice began to crack, not with small, spider web fractures, but with deafening, thunderous reports. Great, gaping fissures, thick as a man's arm, ripped through the colossal block, radiating outward from the symbols, each crack glowing with an unnatural, sickly red light, pulsing in time with the deepening hum. The ancient seal, painstakingly crafted and maintained for untold eons, literally dissolved, turning into a swirling crimson mist that rose from the ice, curling around the monstrous form trapped within. Cain, lying in a broken heap, blood soaking into the frigid ice, forced himself to move. His body screamed in protest, every bone aching, some clearly shattered. The shocking pain of the fall, compounded by the utter bewildering betrayal, slammed into his mind. This was not how it was supposed to go. This was not his victory. This was... He extended a trembling hand, reaching for the silver sword that lay just out of reach, its blade now dull and useless. A chilling, unshakable dread colder than the ice itself began to creep into his heart. He had made a catastrophic error. The cavern shook with a terrifying, earth-shattering groan. Large chunks of ice, loosened from the ceiling, rained down with thunderous crashes. From the rapidly expanding cracks in the dissolving ice prison, a raw, untamed, primordial energy burst forth, a wave of palpable power that slammed into Cain, stealing his breath. Something immense, something ancient beyond measure, was stirring within the melting, blood-stained ice. The silence of the tomb was replaced by a deep, guttural rumble, a sound that resonated with the very fabric of the earth. The last, massive shards of ice, freed from the blood-dissolved seals, shattered with an ear-splitting concussion, exploding outward in a shower of crystal and steam. The air in the cavern filled with the vapor, swirling like a primal mist, obscuring everything for a terrifying moment. Then, slowly, inexorably, from the chaos of the debris, a colossal figure began to rise. It was the ancient being, fully unbound. A titan, 50 feet tall, its massive, muscled form covered in the ancient scars of its long imprisonment. Its fur was the color of storm clouds, its claws like obsidian blades, its fangs long as a man's forearm. Its eyes, twin points of primordial fury, glowed with a terrifying, unquenchable rage, searing through the lingering mist. The sheer force of its presence was like a physical blow, pressing down on the air, making the very stone of the cavern groan in submission. The ancient being turned its massive head, its glowing eyes sweeping the cavern, taking in the destruction, the shattered ice, the carnage. Its gaze fell upon the dying elder, crumpled on the ice, his lifeblood still seeping into the ground. A low, guttural growl vibrated in the ancient being's massive chest, a sound of grinding glaciers. It lowered its head, its cavernous maw opening, and a voice, 1,000 thunderclaps, echoed through the chamber, rattling the very bones in Cain's broken body. "I remember you. You were among those who dared to betray me, to chain me, to deny me my freedom." The elder, in his death throes, twitched. A faint, imperceptible sound escaped his lips, a weak attempt to explain, to offer justification. They had done it for the good of the world, to protect it from the ancient being's ancient wrath. But his words were swallowed by the echoing roar of the ancient being, a sound of absolute unyielding fury. The elder's final choked gasp was lost, his life extinguished without a shred of acknowledgement. He was nothing but a broken toy, a forgotten foe. Cain, his body a ruin of shattered bones and torn flesh, pushed himself up. Blood streamed from a dozen wounds, soaking his clothing, mingling with the elder's on the ice. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot agony that threatened to consume him. But deeper than the pain, deeper than the terror, was the animal instinct, the hunter's instinct, the raw, unyielding pride that refused to admit defeat. He had sought the ultimate weapon. He would not be crushed by it. He would not. With a superhuman effort born of sheer, unadulterated will, Cain dragged himself to his feet. He reached for his most powerful weapon, a ceremonial blade forged in the deepest fires of his ancient lineage, its hilt now slick with his own blood. He ignored the throbbing in his head, the sickening looseness in his left arm, the cold tendrils of fear that sought to paralyze him. This was not the end. Not for him. He lunged, a desperate, almost pathetic attack against a being of such scale and power. He was a gnat, a speck of dust against a mountain. His ancient strength, his vaunted speed, his mastery of combat, all proved utterly, laughably insignificant. The ancient being did not even bother to swat him. It merely raised one colossal paw, its claws, honed for millennia in the icy tomb, like sharpened tree trunks. With effortless indifference, it backhanded Cain. The impact was deafening, sickening. Bones snapped like dry twigs. Cain was sent flying across the cavern, a broken rag doll slamming into the far ice wall with a wet, grotesque thud. He slid to the floor, leaving a gruesome smear of blood and shattered flesh behind him. The ancient being did not even glance at him again. There was no hatred in its eyes, no malice, no triumph, just absolute, profound indifference. Cain was a nuisance, an insect that had briefly disturbed its slumber. Nothing more. The ancient being ignored Kai as well, the transformed creature now little more than a shadow, a whimpering, subservient thing that had served its purpose. The ancient being's gaze was fixed on the cavern's entrance, on the freedom that beckoned, on the world it had been denied for so long. It took a deep, resonant breath, and a low, hungry growl rumbled deep in its chest, a promise of unspeakable devastation. The ancient horror had awakened, and it was free. the ancient being did not linger. With a final, earth-shattering roar that echoed through the cavern and reverberated through the very bedrock of the mountain, it lumbered toward the entrance, its colossal form filling the passage. It moved with a devastating primal grace, each thudding step shaking the ice beneath Cain's broken body. As it passed the inert form of the elder, it paused. Then, with a casual sweep of one massive claw, it impaled the elder's lifeless body. The elder's ancient broken form was lifted, a grotesque trophy, and carried into the pre-dawn gloom of the Alaskan wilderness. The sound of its departure, a deep, rhythmic tremor, slowly faded into the immense, indifferent vastness of the mountains, leaving behind a chilling, profound silence. It was the sound of a global catastrophe beginning, quiet and unnoticed. Cain lay sprawled on the shattered ice floor of the cavern, bleeding out. His blood, dark and viscous, pooled around him, mingling with the last, congealing crimson stains of the elder's sacrifice. The frigid air, which had once seemed merely cold, now became an active, malevolent force, seeping into his ravaged body, slowly, inexorably, claiming his ancient life. Each breath was a shallow, agonizing rasp, a desperate attempt to cling to an existence that was rapidly slipping away. In his dying consciousness, there was no room for triumph, no sense of victory, even in defeat. The cold, logical calculation that had defined his existence shattered like the ice around him. There was only the bitter, undeniable realization of his hubris. His last thought was not of the mission's failure, not of the agency, not of the world he was supposed to protect. It was of the true, horrifying price of his insatiable pride, his relentless hunger for control. He had not solved a problem. He had not found a weapon. He had opened a gate. He had unleashed an ancient, unimaginable terror upon a world utterly unprepared for it. Cain's last breath hitched in his throat, a faint, almost inaudible sigh. His body, once so powerful, so unyielding, went still. The last light in his ancient eyes flickered, then died, leaving them staring blankly at the high, shadowed ceiling of the cavern. Absolute, profound silence descended, thick and heavy. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic drip of water from melting ice, an interminable ticking clock in the vast, echoing tomb. The cavern itself was a ruin, a testament to the brief, cataclysmic events that had transpired within its icy confines. Shards of ice, like broken teeth, lay scattered across the floor. The elder's body was gone, carried away as a grim memento by the awakened terror. Kai's transformed form had vanished, dissolving into the deeper shadows of the cave, his fate an unknown mystery, a chilling loose end. Beyond the desolate, indifferent peaks of Alaska, the world continued to spin on its axis, oblivious. City lights twinkled across vast continents. Children slept in their beds. People went about their mundane lives, utterly unaware of the ancient horror that had just been unleashed. The agency, Vanguard, would eventually initiate an investigation into the disappearance of their best agent, their most formidable asset. They would send search teams into the brutal Alaskan wilderness, find evidence of a struggle, even trace the path to the ruined cave. But they could not comprehend the true scale of what had transpired. They would never understand the nature of the entity that Cain, in his arrogance, had set free. In the world now, a being was free. One whom even the ancient, powerful werewolves had feared enough to seal away for millennia. A creature older than time, more powerful than any known threat, imbued with a primal rage that had festered for eons. The balance had been irrevocably shattered. A new era of terror had begun.